And I'm going to go ahead and open my slides to welcome everybody. And it's 4 minutes after, so we should just start.
Yeah, get the party started.
The party started. There's so many wonderful things to talk about. And in case you were not here for part one, you can ask the question you didn't get to ask for part one, but also you can watch part one's recordings. And if you want to put in the chat what camp your child is going to and where you are joining us from, put that in there so we can give you any tailored information, advice, or maybe you can make friends on chat. Maybe that's a new thing that we can start in this. Friends via chat, I haven't done in the 3 years that I've been living on Zoom, but feels like a reasonable thing.
All right, we got someone going to Camp Lockhart in Vermont, someone coming from Miami, Florida. We have a Larchmont, New York, heading up to Connecticut. Oh, I love seeing all this.
All the good camp things. Okay, let me.
Okay, great. And I will be moderating the chat, so feel free to drop in any questions as we go along. And Marielle will kick it all off now.
Yes. Are you guys able to see? Let me get back into my present mode. Yeah, good. Thumbs up. Seeing things. Perfect. And Lauren, are you able to let people in while we're going as well? Okay, fantastic. Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. We are in the summer camp sprint. Lauren's chunk leaves in a week, so I know she's in the full sprint. And I get more time, so I'm significantly lazier. But hopefully all of you guys are getting everything ready. And tonight we're going to talk about specifically communication, homesickness, and friendships, and then all the other things that are top of mind and lots of time for questions. I'm Marielle Benjamin. I'm the director of groups at Cooper. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in my background. I've been working in early childhood development for about 17 years. Madeline is a second-year camper, and Lucas, who you see in that photo, is a first-year camper. So I'm also completely and totally in it with you. And I have the privilege of knowing Lauren for the last 8 years, since she's been doing small parenting groups with me, similar to what we do at Cooper. And also, she placed my kids in camp. So full circle, we have both worked with each other professionally and personally. And I'm thrilled to be able to be here with all of you and with the Summer 365 audience. So it's very exciting to be here. 2 seconds about Cooper. So we do talks like these about developmentally relevant topics using information on evidence we have around how children grow and thrive and research-based information. Everything I will say is research-based. And if it's just my good old opinion, I'll try and tell you that. And we run monthly small parenting groups, which follow your children as they age and talk about developmentally relevant topics and lots of questions and all the ins and outs of everyday parenting. Come and check us out, and you get a code from tonight, which will be on tonight's handout, which we'll email all of you afterwards, but you get a code for 2 months free to test us out, and we would love to see you there. And Lauren, do you have any words of wisdom you wanted to share tonight with the audience, or you feel good since you're in charge of the busy waiting room? And you're muted. Also muted.
Also amateur hour here. Take it away. I'll chime in as we go along. I'm
okay.
Perfect.
So we're going to start with why friendships matter, what your role should be in friendships, which I think is the most confusing part for parents. Then a little bit into communication at camp. And I know that that is also specific to each camp, but we'll talk about some general do's and don'ts. homesickness being a really important feature we need to prepare our children for, and then good old competitive parenting, because it wouldn't be a parenting talk without acknowledging the elephant in the room. Ground rules: this is a safe space. Feel free to ask or say anything. Let's all just accept that we're anxious, and wherever we are in this process, there is no judgment about it. Let's try to suspend those competitive parenting thoughts for an hour and be authentic with yourself and with each other. And as we said in our last part one of this talk, let's just welcome the anxiety, accept that all of this feels like it's fraught with, all of the stress and strain of each individual moment, but we're going to be okay and move through it instead of try to go around it. So let's start with where your kids are in elementary school. I think most of you, and correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but most of your kids for first time campers are generally in elementary school. Let's talk about the quality of relationships and friendships for them, because I think understanding what you are up against with development is sort of a good way to frame some of the things you're going to see as parents in how they respond to camp. So right now, when we think in the development world about friendships, these are fair weather friends that come and they go, right? We're looking at limited sort of skills around friendships on their own. They fall apart and are formed easily. They have a lot to do with proximity and convenience. They can be judgmental and jealous, right? And kids have a lot of really early notions about what a friend is in a way that's really about how they feel they should be treated and not necessarily reciprocal, and how they feel like they have to treat others. So a lot of the qualities when we think about our children going to camp and making lifelong friends, which is something a lot of us as adults project onto our kids because it was our personal experience, a lot of that isn't really where our kids are in terms of development. And the reason we want to start there and say that right off the bat is that we want our expectations for our children to always be age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for what we can expect. And if you're sending an 8-year-old off to camp for the first time who didn't make a lot of friends necessarily in school and isn't a kid who has tons of friends, then the expectation that he's going to go to camp and make those friends for the rest of his life magically there might not be appropriate. Right? On the other hand, maybe you have a child who has a ton of friends at school and is all about friends and is a little bit cliquey and looks to you like they're all the same, and you really want them to go and try making new friends and doing new things. That might not be their experience, right? So everything that we're going to talk about tonight is filtered through your child's own temperament, their own behavior, what's generally typical for them, and where they are. And there isn't going to be, as with all things, a one-size-fits-all approach that's going to be true for everybody. And that's why you're going to give me all your questions and individual scenarios at the end, so we can make sure that it feels like it resonates. So why do we need friends? This seems pretty obvious, but we have a lot of really compelling research about the importance of early friendships. And some of the ways that we know they're important is that they set a sort of blueprint for what friendships should look like, for what healthy reciprocal relationships are like. And in general, one of the really important reasons we need to have friends early on is to test and try out all of our social skills. So like you may experience if you have multiple children and you see sibling relationships, and anyone's ever told you that that's practice for the playground and it's practice for friends, right? Kids need to play with other kids in order to develop social skills, which means it's normal for them to be really bad at them. And to get better, the more opportunity they have to make friends. So it's key to their long-term development that they get some of this out. So being bad at early friendships is actually really important to getting to healthy friendships later on. And one of, I think, the most interesting things that we find in the research that I wanted to pull out here is that children whose parents talk to them explicitly about friendships and what is involved in friendships and how to create friendships and how to work together in that kind of opportunity to build long-lasting friendships and different stages of development had healthier long-term friendships and romantic relationships later in life. So it's actually how a parent can help you understand these formative friendships that can help, again, that development and that trajectory. It's not the quality of those friendships alone. So nobody's going to panic tonight if we're talking about kids who don't have great friendships, right? But positive friendships have a lot of power, and here's why. There is an emotional security that comes from kids consistently having friends that allows them the space to do lots of other learning and growing. So we see better academic achievement around things like kids' confidence to raise their hand when a teacher asks them a question goes up if they feel the perception of friends in their classroom. They're more willing to take a risk, to put themselves out there, to participate. We also see an influence on self-esteem and that sense of belonging that is so central to self-esteem, which we also touched on in the last talk a little bit. But that having friends and feeling part of a community can help kids to gain confidence and that overcome some of those challenges they may have naturally in their self-esteem. And then sharing interests and passions can help kids to build and extend their learning, to want to step out of their comfort zone or continue to deepen a passion for something when they find that community. If you're a person who's into theater and you find 20 other kids who want to do this play with you, that feels like it can help support and build a passion in a way that's hard to do without that. So while we understand that all of this is great and important, what is a parent's role? And I think this is filtered through, you're not only a parent, and by the way, use all of this for school and for friendships with your friends and summer barbecues and anything else you're going to do. But when it comes to camp, what is a parent's role when you are not even there to observe all the ins and outs of friendship, and when you are trying to read between the lines of very limited communication, right? So what are you going to do with yourself? And if you're really, coming into this talk really nervous around friendships, what are you going to do with all of those feelings? So in general, we want to think about supporting our children's skills to be better at friendships. And the skills are when they're with you. They're applying those to friendships, but those are things you can build. So thinking about negotiation, right? So how do they work to articulate things that they want, to find compromise? If they come to you and they say they want to do something and your instinct is to say no, instead of just giving it a no, although there's plenty of things that we should definitely say no to our children about. For some of the things where you don't have to say no, what can you say? Like, you know what? Explain to me why that's important to you, or why is it that you're asking me that? Or how can you ask me for something in a way I can understand what motivated you instead of just making a demand? Because helping them be able to communicate with others, both adults at camp and other kids at camp, is going to be really important for them, especially in an atmosphere where they don't know a lot of people or any people at all, right? Then you want to think about perspective taking. If you haven't been talking to your kids lately about how someone else feels in a situation, that's a huge skill involved in friendships. So starting now in this last countdown, start talking about, I wonder why he did that. I wonder what was going on with him. I wonder what that person is feeling when they say that to you. Here's what I'm feeling when you ask me that and I need to say no. Understanding the thoughts and feelings of another person is what allows those friendships to be back and forth and feel reciprocal, right? When our kids are rude to each other, very often it's not because they have the intention to be mean, but because they're just simply not tuned in to what the other person is thinking and feeling, or how what they say could offend the other person that they're talking to. And then forgiveness. How are your kids about moving on? Because really what goes with this age is rigid thinking around, I've been wronged and you're dead to me, right? And that's not going to be very helpful when you go to make friends. So talking to your kids about like, yeah, you know what? He did do something that's rude, but also tomorrow's another day, right? And how you can forgive and move on can facilitate your child's ability to make good friends. Then you have to learn how to back off and back way off, which is another wonderful reason you're sending your children to camp, because naturally you've been forced to back off. But you want to stay attuned. So you're looking for signals about how your kids are doing in friendships, and you're looking for connection to their friends. So what this might mean is like, hey, this is a person's name you say a lot. I hear about them a lot. I see them in all of your letters. Like, tell me about that person that's clearly important to you. The effort to get to know your children's friends. We have a lot of research about the importance of that as kids grow and age, is that you just knowing their friends can also help them do all those other things. So for example, if I know Lauren and I generally have a sense of how Lauren treats me in my friendship, and then I go this terrible thing happens and we get in this awful fight, and again, Lauren is dead to me, right? If my mother knows Lauren too and can say, I remember this happened before, but it doesn't feel like the way she normally treats you, right? Then my mother can play that role of perspective taking. My mother can help me by understanding who my friend is, can help me filter whatever's happened through that experience and that knowledge. The other really important thing we have to do is face our own friendship drama. So one of the things I find in my practice is that most parents respond really intensely around friendship drama because it brings up their own friendship drama, right? I did a group the other night and I had one mother saying to me, like, my mother used to say they'll peak in high school. These mean girls have nowhere to go, and she's 30 years later talking about this experience that she remembers how her mother talked to her about friendships and what she felt. Or if you felt left out, or if you felt like you were a follower, or if you were really bossy and had terrible experiences in middle school, right? We're applying all of that to our children when really there's no basis for that. There's no evidence that our trauma or success and popularity in our friendships applies to our kids, because so much of it is around temperament and around what your individual child is bringing to that equation. So we're going to get into sort of how you can manage drama as a parent, but I think I just wanted to start with a quick note around bullying. So one of the things that I hear most often that is just sort of a general misunderstanding is what is sort of the difference between being a jerk and being a bully, right? So it's really common for kids to be just generally rude to each other, which I'm going to define as a jerk, right, in this situation, which is like kids don't have to be nice to each other. But being unkind does not make you a bully. And when we talk about bullying and a response to bullying, which of course we need to take really seriously, we're looking for power, but there's a power imbalance between the bully and the victim in that situation. So they are bigger, stronger, faster, more popular, right? That they have some kind of power imbalance there, that there's repetition, repeated behavior directed at the same person over and over again. So it's not the kid who's stealing food or stealing anything from all the kids. It's about the consistency around one kid. And then it's about harm, that actual harm is being inflicted upon that child. So not just my feelings are being hurt, but I'm actually being targeted and having harm happen to me. And what's really interesting in all of our research around bullying is that most often the why around the child who is the bully is much more productive to A, solving the situation, but B, helping our children understand how to deal with it than it is to deal with just the behavior you're seeing. So most of the time when we dig into why children exhibit bullying behavior, it's around their own bullying they're experiencing in their life, or their own trauma, or their own mental health issues, right? And very little of it has to do with the child that they've chosen to victimize. But the parents of the child they've chosen to victimize make a lot more of it about what's going on in that dynamic. So one of the things to just think about is that, everybody who's unkind to your child is not necessarily a bully, but that if you think that there's bullying going on, then you're really raising the issue to get that bully attention. And then you can deal with your own child and how your child can get out of that situation or be in a different situation separately, right? It's not going to be about you managing that bully's behavior, especially from far away. So as we move into these skills, please feel free to put into chat anything that's coming up. But we're going to move away from what you might have told your children in preschool, in kindergarten, right? We have to be friends with everybody. And we're going to start to talk to them realistically about not loving everybody and that being totally okay. So you're going to have all of this on your handout. You don't have to remember any of these, but just kind of the steps to go through as we start how you're going to help manage friendship drama. So the first one we talked about is that you're going to make peace with your own feelings, right? You're not going to bring your own feelings and insecurities to respond to your child in the midst of friendship angst. You're going to start by validating their feelings. And there's so much confusion about how we validate feelings and then move on right now. So when I say validate feelings, I mean your child's allowed to feel however they want to feel about this situation, and you're going to allow them to own it, right? So that sounds like it's really hard. That's enough. We validated, we can move on. You want to start talking to your kids about the idea that feelings come and feelings go. We talked about this before, but the idea that feelings are like the weather, they won't last forever, right? So this sounds like it's really hard right now. It won't stay that way forever, right? Just like you have really good days that move on, you also have really hard days that move on. And that cycle in friendships is really normal. The ups and downs are actually what's expected. You're going to stay really calm. So one of the problems is we hear about our kids having any kind of friendship drama and we get super activated and we bring all of the intensity of our reaction to bear on you poor camp directors who are maybe in the audience, or on the counselors, or on whoever we can get a hold of, right? We bring all of that intensity and to our children. So, I know camps are different about phone calls and visiting days and all the other things, but if we bring that intensity to our children, we are asking the other person to meet us up here at our heightened emotion, instead of saying super calm and bringing the gift of calm, level-headed thinking to it, right? So if you've heard of the wizard lizard brain, right? When you are just reactive, you are the lizard. You are incapable of using the prefrontal cortex that makes you the incredibly intelligent human that I'm sure you are. And so you're doing a disservice to everybody around you by reacting in that way, and to yourself, because most of us feel like crap after we've gotten the 20 minutes of screaming out, right? Or 20 seconds. Some of us is 20 seconds. So we want to try to bring our wizard brain, our calmest, most regulated self, so that we can actually access all of our problem solving skills. If you've ever been with your kid when you are the lizard and you're trying to model for them how to do anything productive, it doesn't work, right? Because all they see is that reaction. So the best model you can be is, okay, I'm going to sit with that for a second. I'm going to let the other part of my brain literally come online. Remember, because your lizard's going to be faster than your wizard, because biologically that's important. So as your wizard comes online, you're going to say, okay, taking a breath and thinking about this, how would I want to approach it? And that's going to be your best version. You're going to tread lightly. Your kids need less of you as a problem solver and more of you as a sounding board, right? So instead of thinking of yourself as getting in there, getting involved, rescuing them, meddling from afar, I want you to think of yourself as the repository for all of your children's thoughts and feelings. And then you can sit with them. And if you feel like you then need to act on them, you're going to make that a very distinct, separate step, right? So your first reaction isn't going to be to get in there. And this is something you can practice now. So if your kids are bringing you fights with their siblings, fights with their friends, before you say, I'll call the teacher, I'll call their parent, I'll go yell at your brother, I want you to think about empowering your kids to just have shared with you the information and have you just sit with it. And you can say, okay, it sounds like you've got a lot going on. What are you going to do? And give them back, what's your step going to be? What's your solution going to be? And then, as we'll talk about in some of the language, you can say, do you need a suggestion? But the pause between you can be told it and not react to it. And it's so hard for us because sometimes we want to prove to our kids just how amazing problem solvers we can be and just how smart we are and how amazing our lived experience is. And I'm not saying it's not. But it's really important that we encourage them to learn that for themselves, because ultimately that's what's going to make them better at friendships, not our ability to prove how good we are, right? No labeling. If you have done this before, you are never going to do this again. You are not going to say, well, she's just mean, find someone else to play with. Nobody is mean and nobody is kind all the time, right? So the labels don't suit your child. By the way, don't tell your own child like, well, you are just the sweetest. So it can't be you, because anybody, any other adult who's ever seen your child without you can assure you that it could be your child, right? At any moment in time, we're all capable of different, and we're supposed to be, right? We're supposed to have friendships where we're bossy, and friendships where we follow around, and friendships where we're a little bit mean, right? And where that group mentality feels kind of fun to try on. And that's all okay. So if we avoid labels, we have a lot of research about not only the damaging effect of negative labels, but of positive labels. If I always have to be the nice one because my parents have told me whatever you do, you have to be nice to everybody, that's a lot of pressure for me. When I'm not nice, I feel a lot of shame and guilt around it. Instead of saying, even wonderful kids like you have days where you're not that nice, and that's okay too, right? Making space for all of it. We're going to talk about how friendships feel, that friendships feel good, but friendships feel hard, friendships feel complicated, friendships have good days, friendships have bad days. This is not obvious for your kids. Most of your kids think the first time a friendship doesn't feel like it's going well, that they might not be friends anymore, right? So remember, if I'm in third grade and I think that because Lauren's wearing pink and I like pink, we're the same, it's going to be really shocking to me the first time Lauren makes a choice that I wouldn't make, and I'm trying to figure out if we can still be friends, right? So we want to expose our children to the fact that friendships feel complicated like any other relationship that they have. We need to give it time, which is part of that. We need to practice, and we need to ask for help for the people that you have around your kids all the time. So as we get into communication, we'll talk a little bit about where you can find help if you're really concerned about friendships. So everybody always asks for some really specific language. So here are some suggestions. So we had this in the first talk too. I wonder what's going on with them. So one of the best ways that you can build perspective taking is when your child describes something to you that feels like it was mean, it feels like it was hurtful, insulting. You are going to start with encouraging your child to think about what motivated that person instead of something they did, right? So it feels a lot better to your child if you can make it like, maybe that person is having a really hard day. Maybe they're really unhappy about something. Maybe they're feeling really homesick, as opposed to saying, well, what did you do that caused that reaction? Right? Because it's really, as we said with the bullying, it's really not about your child. And if we make our child think that if they just did something else better, nobody would ever hurt their feelings, that's a really false sense of like what they have to do all the time, because their feelings are going to get hurt no matter how fantastic they are at navigating social skills, right? So answering back, I wonder what's going on with them, and projecting that empathy about anybody. My brother hit me. My sister told me this. In this next month, we only have like a couple weeks, but in the couple weeks, think about using phrases like that that really encourage the understanding that behavior is communication. So friendships sometimes have hard days, exactly what we were just talking about. The idea that fights and arguments are normal, and that your child is riding the waves of friendship. We want our kids to have a bit of a thick skin around friendships, right? We want them to understand that other things are going on with other kids. And we want them to be able to move on and recover quickly so that they don't hold a grudge and they can make any friends. We talked a little bit about, do you need a suggestion on how to handle that? So if your kids have come to you with something, if they're telling you about something, thinking about giving them just the right support they need, but not taking over. And that scaffolding approach is going to do really well for you both this summer and beyond, because one of the things you're sending them to camp for is to work on that autonomy. If you're trying to manage everything from far away, you're actually undercutting the benefit of that autonomy, because we don't want them to think that they need your opinion on every single thing that they want to tell you. So some other friendships around specific to sleepaway camp and around what that is going to look like, about the idea that they don't have to know the second they get there that they love these people forever, right? That there's room for friendship to feel really hard. And you might say to your kids, are you at all worried about making friends at camp? Do you have any ideas how you're going to do it? Do you know how you're going to talk to people on the first day? Do you want to practice anything? Do you have any questions about it? And for some of you, that might open up the door to kids who want to talk about it and want to have suggestions. And for others, you're going to get a response of like, no, I got this, mom. Thank you. I'm not interested and I don't need your help, which is great also. But you can create the space for it by saying like, you know what? Sometimes it's even hard for me to make friends. So just so you know, if you don't figure it out on day one, it's not a big deal. And I like to have these conversations in the car or on a walk where you don't have to make direct eye contact and you're just kind of like throwing little nuggets of wisdom into the air for them to hear them, but you don't have to talk through everyone and you don't have to make it like an intense sit down, which is emotionally a lot for your kids to commit to, right? You don't have to love everyone. You just have to find a few people, right? So again, if you've convinced your kids that they want to go to camp because you talk about your 5 best friends in the world are still the friends that you made at camp, if you are those people, it's wonderful for you. I'm so excited that you've had that experience, but that is not a realistic expectation for your kids to have about making quality friendships, especially if they're a person who has one friend right now, or maybe no close friends right now. So just saying, you don't need to like everybody. It's totally okay if you don't like everybody. You just need to find a few people that you can have fun with, right? That you can be comfortable with, that you can feel like you're yourself with, right? And set the bar lower for them so that that pressure is off and they don't think they have to have the same experience that you had. The bunk thing, so much pressure and intensity around who's going to be in your bunk. So you can remind them, you don't have to love everybody who's in your bunk. There's going to be so many different kids at camp and you can find friends in other places. And if there's somebody who drives you nuts in your bunk, okay, so you'll find something else to do, which again, that's giving them the skills to be able to manage that situation. You're saying to them, I have confidence in you. If you don't like everybody in your bunk, you're going to find somebody else you like, as opposed to if you don't like everybody in your bunk, call me and we'll try to figure out how to get you in your bunk. Or they promised me that this and this person and this person and that person won't be there and this person, and all of the over involvement that we tend to want to get into. This is about how you talk about friendships. So if the specific language helps you, use it. If it doesn't help you, by no means is there a script that you have to do this with, but you can tell your kids, generally friends should make you feel good, right? If there are friends who make you feel bad or feel sad, it's okay to move on to someone else. Because again, that preschool notion that you have to sit with the same friend because you said on day one you were going to be nice to them, and now you feel like you'd be mean if you moved on. We don't want our kids to have to feel like they have to do that all the time. So if something's not working for them, it's okay for them to move on, and it's okay for them always to talk to their counselors about needing help with friends. This is back to there's no pressure to find a million people that you love, right? We just want you to have a good time. So again, if you've been talking a lot about friendships, back off of some of it and maybe just emphasize wanting you to have a good time and wanting you to enjoy yourself, whatever that looks like for your particular kid, right? There are kids who are, as we talked about in the first part one of this talk, there are kids for whom that relationship with the counselor is going to be what's really meaningful to them this summer, and time spent with quote unquote adults, right? And that's going to be really valuable. It doesn't have to be that they found that gaggle of kids that they're connected to. So are there questions or thoughts on friendships that anybody wants to interrupt along the way? Are we good? Where can you find part one? Okay, great. That's that one we can solve. Yes. Okay. All right. So moving on to communication. And again, I want to acknowledge that I know that each camp has their own policy around communication, but I want you to sort of take a second to think about how your child will receive your communication as being much more important than what you need to get out of communication. This is where you are not equal in this sort of circumstance, right? And we want our kids to have the most ideal experience they can have and not have your need for communication interfere with that. So instead of deciding for our kids exactly how we want to communicate, I want you to take a minute thinking about what works best for your child and what type of communication is going to most benefit them this summer. Right? And so an example of that would be saying to your kids, hey, your camp allows me to send emails. Do you want a message from me every day, or does it feel like it might be too much to hear from me that much? What do you think? Do you want me to send you the baseball scores so you know what's going on and we can just talk about that? Or do you feel like you want to hear updates about what's going on? You can ask them. Do you want funny jokes, or will they be embarrassing if you're the one getting postcards? I learned this the hard way. I wrote all the postcards backwards because I thought that was so funny. And I remember as a kid thinking that was really cool. And my daughter was like, this is so annoying. I don't want any of these. I have to hold them up to the mirror and it's creating all this drama, and everybody in the bunk is asking why you write backwards. So it's really talking through what is going to work for them and what feels good to them. And doing it in a way that doesn't have a ton of pressure, where you say, I need you to write me this often. I need you to tell me everything that's going on. And then thinking about what's in the content of the letter. Because one thing we know is that most of your kids are going to be homesick. If you needed me to tell you because you've been in denial about it, most everybody is going to be homesick at some point in their time at camp. And part of learning to go to camp is learning to manage homesickness. But there are some ways that we can really trigger that homesickness. And one of them is in our communication with our kids, right? So we first need to talk to our kids about homesickness really explicitly. And we touched on this in part one, but we, sort of didn't get into it. And I got a lot of follow-up questions from people who were like, I don't want to tell them that they're going to be homesick, because if I put that out there, I'm giving them ideas. But that's not how information works, right? Information isn't suggestive. And if we know 97% of kids get homesick, I want to just tell you that it's going to happen whether or not you talk about it. But saying to your kids, and again, this is only meant to help you if scripts feel good for you, and you'll have all of this on your handout, but saying something like, most kids are going to miss home at some point, and that's normal. Sometimes it happens when you're trying to fall asleep, when you have quiet time, when you're not so busy, right? And if that happens, I want you to know that that's okay, and it's going to go away. And that's where you're going to use your confidence that they can get through hard things for them to borrow, right? We need them to think you believe in them. That's why we talked about not rescuing them, not saying you're going to pick them up, not telling them that there's an out in any way, right? You're confident that they're going to make it through this summer. And you're also confident that these moments when they happen are going to be something that they can get through. But now I need to think about my letters, because if my letters say, I miss you so much, the house is so quiet without you, your dog is looking for you everywhere, he's sleeping in your bed every night just waiting for you to come home. These are all things that when your kids read them inspire homesickness, right? So one of the things that I urge you to do is keep your communication, whatever it's about, really short, really simple, and really boring. There are a million ways to tell your kids you're thinking about them without saying about how much you're thinking about them, right? So again, maybe you're sharing sports scores for something they care about that they can't access at camp. Maybe you're writing about the weather, right? Maybe you're just putting the paw print of the dog on the card that you're mailing instead of writing that the dog is, crying for them in their bed, right? So you're really thinking about how homesickness and communication collide and the role that you can play. A few tips around homesickness. So these are a few of the phrases that we really like that can kind of help kids to prepare in advance. So when that happens, can you think of something that could make you laugh, right? It's really great if you can change the channel for them in their brains by giving them something to laugh about. Thinking about any activity that they can do when they feel that way. Do they have something they count? Do they have a visualization exercise? Do they squeeze their lovey? Do they wear a bracelet that reminds them of home that they can rub 3 times, right? We're not above magical powers infused into those, security items, right? So if they have a thing they can say or do, leaning into that. And then fact checking. So one really valuable resource you guys have are all of the adults at camp who can tell you how your children are doing without the bias of your children. So you can reflect that back to your kids. You can say to them, I know when we talked, things were going really badly for you or things felt really hard, but it sounds like you're doing great now. And I'm so happy to hear that, right? If that is your conversation and you are moving on from what the rest of the adults tell you, then that has to be your fact check for what you're hearing from your kids, right? I think, Lauren, you use the emotional terrorist kind of thing about your kids, reserving all of their big thoughts and feelings. But I think it's actually really Terrorist makes it sound like it's a bad thing, and I think it's actually really a good thing. You can be the repository and the vault of all of your kids' worst moments and feelings. You just have to learn not to do anything about it, that you just have to sit with it. And that's the crappy part about being their parents forever and ever, right? Is that you're tolerating their discomfort while they're learning to live through it. But again, if you're really worried about anything you're hearing, you've got these incredible adults who can do something about it for you and tell you, I'm so sorry that you heard that. But by the way, I saw her 3 times today and she was laughing and smiling the whole time. And her counselor tells me she's doing great. And it takes her a little time to fall asleep at night. And that may be where she's telling you she's having the worst time of her life, but then she's doing great the rest of the day. And you can put it into context, because what your kids choose to share with you is by no means an accurate picture. And you know this because you know that happens with school and with everything else that they're experiencing. They are not the best historians when it comes to telling us an accurate portrayal of what's going on. And part of that is cognitive, just so you know. It's not manipulative, it's not intentional. I mean, it might be intentional if it gets a rise out of you. So one thing to be aware of is that it's like interviewing for pain, if you guys have heard that term before. If your children sense from you that you are most interested in the sort of angst that they're experiencing and that gets the most reaction out of you, they will continue to pick those angsty moments to share with you because they can see that you have a big reaction to it. So you actually want to kind of underplay your reaction to those things in general so that you don't create this dynamic where your kids are like really trying to get a rise out of you with the stories that they can tell. Okay, so quickly, I know we don't have a ton of time left, moving on to competitive parenting. I'm sure that I don't have to tell the 43 of you about competitive parenting. We are well aware. We are the first generation of parents to believe there is a right way to parent, which of course there isn't, but that doesn't convince us. Just evidence that there isn't one way to do it doesn't mean anything to us. We have higher demands and expectations of ourselves than any generation of parents before us. We spend more time, significantly more time. Working mothers today spend 3 times as much time with their children as stay-at-home mothers did in the 1970s, but it is not enough. It is not enough for dads. Dads spend 3 times more time with their children than they did a decade ago, and 80-something% of them say it's still not enough, right? We have so much data about this, but it's just not enough. We feel constantly that we have to be involved in all aspects of our children's lives. And because we are so invested in our kids, we tend to think that they are a reflection of our parenting, right? That everything we put in is something we're going to get out on the other end. And we forget that that's just not how humans develop and how kids work. So we bring all of the stress, all of those unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and we bring it to places like WhatsApp groups of camp moms. And we put in anxiety around one story we heard, and that spirals into everybody having anxiety. And then the people who didn't have anxiety about that have anxiety that they didn't have anxiety about that, right? And that someone else is paying more attention than their child, or someone else is checking the pictures more often than they're checking the pictures, or someone else is talking to their kid, right? And it becomes this cycle where we're become very unhappy about it, right? For most of us, that kind of competitive parenting, that kind of parenting atmosphere makes us less satisfied with our parenting overall. Over 30% of parents say they feel lonely when it comes to decisions around parenting, right? Because, and again, this is why we started Cooper, and I encourage you to join a group, but because many of us don't have groups with a non-judgmental audience, we have groups around specific things like camps. We just get the worst of everybody else's sort of stuff, right? And as we know, because we're humans, we regulate towards each other. So if I'm on a WhatsApp group with another really anxious mom, it's not her fault, but that anxiety is contagious, right? And I'm going to absorb it. And then I'm going to spread that anxiety onto the next one, right? And that's where some of this just does us a disservice. So thinking about disengaging when conversations become what we would call toxic, when they're just not doing you any good, and owning that and saying, you know what, this isn't who I am. This isn't what I wanted out of the summer experience. This isn't the concerns and priorities I have for my family, and that's okay. You don't have to be a joiner to do this experience really well. You can do it your own way that feels authentic and valuable to you and your family. And then you have to find the people with whom you feel regulated, that you can have those good, productive conversations, especially if you have concerns. Crowdsourcing around a concern really doesn't make a whole lot of people feel better. Bringing a concern directly to the source at camp and talking about it with someone who has that perspective is more likely to resolve that for you than spinning, behind the scenes on a group, right? And again, happy to get into that more, but it's really just about you finding where you need the off ramp. And that brings us to questions. So we have like 10 minutes. I'm going to close this. So, we can maybe see the black boxes of all the people who don't want to show us their faces. Uh-oh, am I frozen or we're back? Are we okay? Lauren, am I frozen? No, okay.
My mouse went dead for a second, but we're good now. Yes.
Okay, good. We're good. Perfect.
Anyone, please feel free to chime in with questions. I'll just kick it off. We had gotten one, a couple of people had emailed me prior. Some people were asking, just as we think about communication and talking to our kids about all of these helpful tidbits, do you have any tips for the bus, for drop off, all those in-person things when we're emotionally elevated? Everyone's going to do drop off differently. Some will bring to a bus, some will bring to an airport, some might drop off at camp. Any tips and advice for these emotionally charged moments of drop off, and even thinking towards visiting day, which might necessitate a whole separate chat for how to crush visiting day? But any thoughts about that, or anything from your personal toolbox, having sent your daughter for the first time, thoughts on that and kind of doing the goodbye pretty well?
So many thoughts on that. I think that the headlines are, if you have questions about what that moment's going to be like, ask those now privately, adult to adult at camp, about what you can expect that to look like. And then prepare your child for what that experience is going to be. If you don't know and you don't have the information to make peace with your own anxiety, it's going to be very hard for you to be a reassuring presence for your child, right? Number two, I would say, this is, Lauren really likes my really professional phrase of just go dead inside. But I do believe there are some times where you need to just fake it completely and just completely separate your emotional reaction to the goodbye of your child going off to sleepaway camp for 8 weeks and what's good for your child in that moment. And it's not particularly good for your kids to see you hysterical. No, I'm not saying you can't cry, right? But if they have to worry about you and your reaction, it compounds their ability to do something that's already hard for them. So I don't want any of your children to worry about you. If you're a crier and you just know that's going to happen, then before you get to the day, you're going to say, you know what? There's basically no way for me to hug you before you get on that bus and not cry. But mommy's a crier. You know this. Mommy cries at the cotton commercial, and she cries at the movies, and she cries about everything. And so I might be crying, but I'm not sad. I'm actually so happy that you're going to have this experience, and I'm good, and I know how to take care of myself, and I love you so much, and I just want to make sure you know that. And then you've at least owned in advance that that's going to be for you. But then you have to really not get hysterical, which is your own personal journey, and you have to work on that. And that's why, if you are someone who's really worried about that emotionally charged situation, knowing more information about the who and what that's going to look like can help you to plan for that. I wouldn't make your kids any promises you can't keep. So saying we're going to find someone who's going to sit with you on the bus, right? Like that, it's not helpful. The camps know how to do this so well. This is what they do. So I would defer to them. And every time your child asks you a question about what's that going to be like, say, I don't know, but there's going to be a lot of people around that we can ask. And I know the camp does, you know what? The camp has new kids every year, every session. They're really good at taking care of new kids, and empower these surrogate parents that they're going to have to know the answers and know the information so that you can really set them up as experts from the beginning. And if your kids think you're looking to them for answers, your kids are more likely to look to them for answers and support. right? And then for the actual goodbye, we have tons of experience around this with separation, and all of you have had this when you sent your kids to school and, you know, day camp or whatever it was before, but a short and sweet goodbye. There's one hug, there's one handshake, there's one saying, if you have a family motto or a funny thing that you send them on their way with, and then it's goodbye, right? So we're not running back for one more hug and one more kiss. And if your kids are doing that, they're running to you and you're saying, we did it, we got this, you're ready, go. You're not indulging over and over in that ritual, right? And the cleaner you can make it and the more you can practice those clean goodbyes from now until the day, the better for your kids, because they're not going to take it personally. They're going to understand that this is for the benefit of everybody moving on. Don't chase the bus down the street.
Right. And don't let their emotions shake you.
Don't let that shake you. You're right. That's not the time to question your decision, right? In the moment that they're crying that they don't want to get on the bus and they've changed their mind, that's not the time to revisit the whole thing, right? You can really simply say, I know this feels really hard right now, but there's a million reasons that you wanted to go to camp and that we knew this was going to be a great summer, and you are going to be okay. And remember, as we talked about in part 1, the value is on them understanding they can work through it. It's not on them not having those feelings. It is totally healthy and normal for all of your kids to have those feelings. It's that you model for them that when those feelings come up throughout the duration of their life, that they can get through it, right? If you tell them that when they feel those feelings, something's wrong, then that will make it hard for them to feel those feelings every time that they have them, forever and ever to come.
So true. Any other
No pressure. That sounded like a lot of pressure. You can mess up a few times, all the time. Just do it right 25% of the time. You're golden.
Yeah, and I think equally as daunting, I actually happen to have a child in the camp of no current worries, anxieties, fears, perceived homesickness, or questions. And I got to plant seeds throughout. And I started to do so, plant seeds throughout the coming weeks on what it looks like, because I do know when I have a suspicion, a couple of days before, the night before, we're gonna go in meltdown mode, but that's to be expected. That's a common pattern, and just want to prepare her with the tools and skills of what that's going to feel like and look like, because I think I don't want it to hit her like a storm the night before. And I think it's equally as important for the kids who feel like they got this, they're so excited, to really chat it through with them, because you don't want, I think, those emotions to sort of take them by surprise, and kind of just talk through and plan and you know, kind of share, you know, do you think it's a good idea to share a time when you were homesick, whether it was at camp or college or whatever it is, or kind of plant the seed and kind of see where their questions are?
It depends. I think if they're sharing with you their concerns about missing you, then a personal experience of times you felt that way can be valuable, right? And I would keep it pretty light in terms of, you know, I used to feel homesick at camp and I can remember what that feels like, and it doesn't feel good, but I mostly felt it when I was falling asleep at night. And by the next morning, I was so excited and I was doing so many fun things. I couldn't wait to have another day. And for me, it went away when I was busy and I was doing things, you know, in that kind of way. I think if you have a child like you're describing who is convinced they will not feel homesick, then the personal experience isn't helpful. I think you're just putting out there, you know, I know you're really excited for camp. I just want you to know you can be really excited and miss home. And sometimes that happens and it's a surprise. And I don't want you to be surprised. I just want you to know if you miss home, that's okay. And if you don't miss home, that's okay too. Right? And so you are setting up, because one thing that we all do to our kids is like, did you miss me? And what, like, as if you need to be validated that your kids still love you, just don't ask them to tell you they missed you, right? The hug they will give you when they come home will be enough for you to know that of course they missed you, and of course they're happy to see you, even though I think it took Madeline like 10 minutes to cry that she missed camp, which was really, we weren't even home yet. We were still in the car. And I was like, well, this feels good, right? Like, you know, but in those moments, again, it's not about you. So nothing good comes from wanting them to express that they miss you and they feel sad. And so even just saying to them, if you don't miss me, that's great. But if you do, that's okay too. And maybe you tell them strange things that you missed, like your shower. I don't know if camps have improved their water pressure. I'm just going to put
a little bit, and the hot water
Okay.
situation. Many
Okay.
do have endless hot water heaters now, and you don't have to
Okay.
wait for the first shower.
Oh, see, this feels unfair. Like this feels like it's too
Some, not
easy to
all.
be a
Some, not all.
child. It feels
Yes.
too easy to be a child. So in my day, you did want the first shower and the water pressure was just it wasn't what you were used to, right?
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
so you can say funny things you missed about home, and I think that might be more valuable to some kids than necessarily going for the heartstrings of missing your mom.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think the other thing, like that's a good point to bring up, whenever we've done these talks or camp directors always remind us, I think sometimes parents don't either want to feel like a burden or don't want to get, always feel free to check in with your camp directors. I know there's a bunch on here, some we've talked about this before. If you ever have a gut feeling, I think it's good to pause, reflect, take a step back and check your emotions and realize if it's an email, if it's a phone call, or especially if it's a letter, that information is days old. They've probably navigated through that moment. But if you ever have that gut feel or you haven't heard from camp yet and you don't know how your child's acclimating, they feel free to be in touch and do what you need to do. But I think they're here to help support you, but most importantly also know they will be in touch if there is kind of a big picture situation going on, something that needs your assistance or your attention, and they're going to be in touch, and they do want to hear from you if needed. So I think a lot will remind us, don't be a stranger if you do have questions or concerns, but know they've got this. And most camps do have a policy. If you aren't familiar with it, that they'll be in touch anywhere from some is 36 to 72 hours after arrival. Again, it's different for all camps. Some call, some email, but most of them will be in touch to let you know how your child's doing. And also most will let you know once your child has arrived. So you will get that, initial touch point from most camps.
And I think it's valuable both ways for you to check with them what they're seeing so you can feel better about the 99% of the day that you don't hear about, right? But it's also valuable for them to know that your child is sending you those types of letters or is expressing that, because that's information that they may not have and they may not see, right? And so again, I don't think any parent should ever feel like they have to wait until they're so concerned about it that they just can't hold it in anymore. But by the same token, I want you to respond with your wizard brain when you're reaching out to camp and not be so hysterical that what you've heard, is so horrible, because you want to make room for the rest of that explanation and to reconcile the two opinions on like what they're seeing at camp. So I think it's both. It's like take that pause, take a minute, and then ask. And you can ask in a way that just presents your curiosity. Like, I'm hearing this in the letters and I'm wondering what you're seeing, is a really great opener for like, I'd love to have a conversation about this, right? Or like my favorite that I get every single summer, the parents who tell me like, he's not smiling in any pictures. I mean, I've never known that to be a clear indication of anything going on with a 9-year-old boy before, right? But like, bring that forward to camp and just say like, I know that it might seem nuts, but this is what I'm noticing and this is what I'm feeling, and give them the opportunity to quiet that for you so you can just have such a more pleasant experience than like letting it fester and then going on that WhatsApp group and saying to everybody like, I don't think they're smiling, the weather feels like it's been terrible, they're all probably miserable, and start that situation.
Many people on my team and parents I know who've sent their kids to camp say silence the group chat until visiting day. Just silence
Every
it
time,
every time, here and there, but silence it for the most part, because I think that can send you down a spiral for sure. And just wait for your child to have their own experience, do their own thing. Avoid the group chat when possible.
Yes. And the number of kids who tell you they're homesick all summer and send you these horrible letters and then can't wait to go back, right? So just, again, have perspective on all of it that you're getting in your little, small experience.
So I mentioned this last session, but for anyone who does not follow or hasn't checked out homesick.com, which is an Instagram account, you must follow along and see when I say the word emotional terrorists, all the beautiful letters kids write home, in all of their most vulnerable moments at camp, and they will give you an incredible chuckle if you scroll through them. Some profanities coming from 8 and 9-year-olds. Beautiful. Really good.
I had great success with scratch and sniff cards. I'm just going to put that out there if anybody is looking for joke scratch and sniff cards, because they had no emotional content. They were very easy to send in the mail. Then you don't have to write anything at all. It can just be thinking of you, right? Like just receiving that mail. But if anybody, it goes without saying, there are specific things with kids, and yeah, you should, Gabby, you should. I was going to say, it's so funny that you put that in the chat, because I was going to say you should silence the school one. I need to silence the dance team one. I'm sure any of you who play sports, all the WhatsApp groups are bad for the mental health at some point. But it goes without saying, if you are having a particular issue or a question about your kid, you can reach out anytime. We do private sessions, we do groups. We'll come back and do another one if you tell us a topic that is coming up for everybody. Be in touch with Lauren and what you guys need in the community. But we would love to support you as you go through this. And even if it's just to support you with your feelings as your child goes through this, right? Because they're two very different summer experiences.
Absolutely.
Although I'm going to watch every show on streaming that I've been hearing about for 11 years that I haven't watched, now that both my kids will be away.
Be a empty nester for a couple weeks.
It's going to be phenomenal. It's going to be a lot of catching up on shows in my future.
Well, I think that brings us to just a touch after 9. We did so good on time, I have to say. So thank you so much. This was so incredibly helpful. I can't tell if I was very selfishly doing this for myself, but also bringing in all the people to be a part of this journey as first-time camp parents. But truly let us know, anyone who has individual questions. We sort of did this 2.0 because of all the feedback we got. We've have all kinds of ideas about visiting day, the return home. So if anyone, we'd love feedback. So if anyone needs individual sessions, group sessions, let us know. We would love to curate those and put those together. But in the meantime, you can follow along with both Cooper and Summer 365 on all things camp throughout the summer. And Marielle, you are the absolute best. Thank you so much for your time.
Ditto. This is so fun. Good luck, everybody. Have fun. Enjoy it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Send me all your streaming recommendations while my kids are at camp.
I got you.
Bye, everybody. Good night.